Hello everyone, welcome to Gelling Outdoors. I'm Paul. Today we're going to take a look at three types of cuttings: bucking, ripping, and noodling. What are they? How do you do them? Let's start with the easiest one first, bucking. It's the most common. It's basically cutting a tree up into lengths for dimensional lumber on a mill or cutting it into blocks for firewood. Let's do a little bit of cutting for that. Okay, so I've done some bucking there. I've cut 2 blocks of wood for firewood. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do some noodling. The main purpose of noodling is basically to cut a block of wood into a smaller section, just like splitting it with an axe. Makes it much more simple if you have a big massive block that you can't really handle with an axe or a maul. It just makes it easier to split it up. What you do is you cut it up into a smaller section so that you can break it up with an axe. Let's take a look at that. So as you can see there, basically you put the wood on the bark side. You cut along the top and basically you end up with the blocks. Now that's much easier to split up for firewood. So let's take a look at our third method, ripping. Ripping is normally used when you're going to do some chainsaw milling. You have an apparatus that you configure onto the log and you cut dimensional lumber by using the chainsaw mill. In addition to that, normally when you're ripping, you're going to use a different type of chain. You're going to use a ripping chain. It's normally sharpened at 10 degrees versus 25 to 35, which you would use on when you're cross-cutting or you're bucking. Now you can use a normal chain to do your ripping. It doesn't really matter. Big difference between using a ripping chain and just your stock chain is that the ripping chain will give you a much smoother, finer product. So let's get to how you do a ripping. As you see, I put my wood the same way on the bark as I did when I did the noodling. Instead of cutting across the top and down doing noodling, I went across along the grain through the center of it to do ripping. Now I could have done the ripping with my block of wood standing up like this. No difference whether I have it standing or if I have it lying down. The basic reason for ripping, as I mentioned, is to make dimensional lumber. So normally you wouldn't do this on a block of wood. You'd use it on a big long piece of wood. Guys, one thing I wanted to tell you about is the different types of sawdust that gets produced from the different types of cuts. This is noodling. You can see it's long strands of fibers. Really nice. Now the only issue when you're doing noodling, you get, if you're cutting it up for firewood, blocking it up to make things easier, I suggest that you don't cut more than you need to, because you do waste a lot of wood. This is basically the sawdust chips from when I did the bucking. You can see they're much larger, nice sized chips, and not a lot of waste of wood. And here we've got the ripping sawdust. You can see it's very fine in comparison to the others. Now the big thing about ripping, if you notice, the saw is best more on a 45-degree angle than if it's at a 90-degree angle when you're cutting. It will produce a small sawdust like this. It is a little harder on the chainsaw than the other two methods. Also, it does take a little bit longer. It's a little bit of a slower process. Now, if you use a ripping chain, the sawdust probably be even a little bit finer. So, anyways, that's the three methods. You've got noodles, you've got bucking, and you've got ripping. So next time you're in a wood pile at someone else's place, you'll know exactly what they did, whether they ripped, or whether they noodled, whether they bucked, or whether they ripped. So guys, that's a high-level explanation of what ripping, bucking, and noodling are. Once again, bucking is basically to cut into firewood chunks or into log lengths for processing at a mill, or if you just want to make fence posts or something like that nature. Ripping is basically when you have a long piece of log that you want to cut into dimensional lumber using a chainsaw mill. And noodling is primarily when you want to take a large block or chunk of wood and you want to cut it in half or into quarters so that you can split it up a little easier with your axe, or just in basic to handle it easier when you're loading it into your truck or something. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Also share it with a friend, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button down below. I would appreciate that. Once again, thanks for watching Gentleman Outdoors. We'll see you next time.